Good morning. Nice cheery faces out there. Welcome to the Umpqua Unitarian Universalist Congregation, a place that puts its faith in you, a place where you can be yourself, but not by yourself. I'm Martha Sinkul, and I'm your service leader today. We're so glad that you're here with us, and I especially welcome those of you watching from home and those who might be visiting for the first time. Welcome. And those who haven't been here for a while. I saw a couple of people we haven't seen for a while. It's wonderful to have you here. Please stay for coffee and conversation afterwards so we can get to know each other better. Today we continue our live streaming to bring our message out to the world, out to the greater community. Those of you at home who receive our newsletter can follow along. If you have access to the UMQuest with the order of services in the UMQuest, that was something that maybe hadn't occurred to people at home. If you do get the UMQuest, there is not only the announcement of the service, but there's an order of service in the UMQuest, so you can follow along at home. And also you can see the lyrics that we will have when Sean does his music for either an anthem or his hymns. Please, if you have one of these little wonderful electronic devices, please make sure that they're on silent so that we aren't entertained by various call rings during the service. Thank you. I want to thank Dana and Gemma for being our greeters today. And today we have John Milner filling in for Jake, who had to go to Southern California for a memorial service for a family member. Henry Sill is assisting. Thank you, Henry. Sean is doing our music. And of course, Genevieve in the office, who always does a wonderful job in preparing our orders of service and getting things ready for our greeters. All work together to make our services. And as you remember, this is what I've said for several weeks, as a congregation, we need to keep on working together as to bring our beloved community together through the changes that are taking place here in our congregation and outside in the world. Please continue to come from love and patience as we all adjust to things that are different. That's really hard for a lot of us old folks, adjusting to things that are different. Thanks every one of you who are here today, and for those who aren't, for caring to keep this very important space vital. We're delighted to have our Dennis Reynolds with us today, who has spoken. He's been with us for a couple, 3 years as a visiting UU minister. He's retired, former teacher and administrator at the University of Oregon. He's retired to Eugene after serving churches in Oregon and Washington State, and he's also been a hospital chaplain. And he's currently serving the UU Church in Eugene as an affiliated community minister. He's been an activist both locally and globally, and he believes the most powerful sermons are those written with a religious text in one hand and a current news source in the other. So we always get a little touch of what's happening today with what's happening in the back, the history of. I have some announcements. The board meets next Sunday, 9/18. We are continually working on developing committees and liaisons, making sure that every board member has contact with various committees and working ways to fundraise. We have our bottle drop. Do we have the bottle drop stuff? Has it been out? Was there a bottle? Good, thank you. I came in too early to see that. Thank you very much. Laleen and JC took care of that. So bring your clean bottles and plastic and dump them in the can. And Betsy Callahan has volunteered, I believe, didn't you, Betsy, to take bags when they're ready to bottle drop. So all you need to do is bring them here and we'll take care of them. The other thing is we have some other fundraisers that we're working on. Amazon, I can't remember what it is, Amazon Smile, is that what it's called? Through Amazon and from Fred Meyer. So those are 2 other places. Just doing your shopping, we will get credit eventually. So that'll be a good thing for us to make some money that way. We have a need for someone to help us with childcare. I just talked with Annan before service, and there is a UUA rule that we can't have just a one person take children downstairs. We need another person who could be a runner in case of an emergency, or for insurance purposes and safety purposes, it's really a need. We also, so if any of you have any idea of someone that could help us out, volunteer. And then eventually, we're going to be looking for a religious education person to coordinate programs for other groups, other ages. So keep your ears and eyes open, and if you have suggestions, please let me or Laleen or any board member know. We really would appreciate it. Also, our committee, the Sunday Services Committee that makes these services weekly, we're in need of another person or two to help us out. It's now become maybe 3 of us that are actively doing services, and we really would love to have somebody come. There might be just one thing that you could do to help us out. That would be true. That would be wonderful. So contact me or Laleen, and we'd be glad to talk to you. Laleen, do you want to come on up and make your announcement? Oops.
Sorry, you have to climb down.
No, you stand.
Good morning. As was mentioned, we have a board meeting next Sunday, and it has come to us from many different sources, and we appreciate hearing from you, that many of you feel it's time to remove these inside the UU, provided everyone is vaccinated. So I'd like to take a vote of the will of the body here. The idea is if you, like I happen to, have a compromised immune system, you may choose to wear this mask at any point, of course. But for the rest of us who are fully vaccinated and the rates have gone down and are feeling more comfortable, we're asking you how you feel about the board changing the policy and removing the requirement of masks inside for UU functions. Could I get a yes from those who are in favor? We're voting on whether to take these masks off at UU functions. You're voting yes if you put your hand up. We got a couple two-handers now. All right, that looks almost unanimous. So from this point on, masks inside the UU when we are fully vaccinated is a matter of choice. Actually, I should say after next Sunday to make it official.
It's some of those that you can please all the people some of the time, but nobody all the time. I guess that's, whoever said that? Bob Dylan. I thought it was some, major. I personally will be wearing a mask anytime I go to Costco or any of the shopping centers or any other place. I just feel here with all the people that are here that we know, that we sort of, we're not out hanging out in wild places. I don't know that, but I'm not saying you are or you're not. But if you want to continue to wear a mask, please do, because it's your right to have that mask on, okay? So,
Martha?
yes, dear.
So is the vaccine requirement still in place?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you for asking that. I don't think that was clear. Any other questions before we continue? Okay. All right, now is the time in our service that we make our collection for fish. And as you know, we're one of several churches that support fish through our contributions of money and food. So in our compassion for those of us who are not as well off and who need help, we'll take an offering of food and money. And is there anybody else that might help? Oh, good, we got 2 people. Here you go. Thank you. Thank you so very much for your generosity. It now is time for us to light our chalice, which I already did, so I'm going to delight it, extinguish it. I was practicing to make sure that it would light.
And clearly it did.
And it did. So we'll do it again. You want me to start? Our chalice lighting words are by Mary Oliver. Morning poem. Every morning, the world is created.
Under the orange stick of the sun, the heaped ashes of the night turn into leaves again.
And fasten themselves to the high branches, and the ponds appear like black cloth on which are painted islands of summer lilies.
If it is your nature to be happy, you will swim away along the soft trail for hours, your imagination alighting everywhere.
And if your spirit carries within it the thorn that is heavier than the lead, if it's all you can do to keep on trudging,
there is still somewhere deep within you a beast shouting that the earth is exactly what it wanted.
each pond with its blazing lilies is a prayer heard and answered lavishly every morning.
Whether or not you have ever dared to be happy, whether or not you have ever dared to pray. Daring to pray. As Martha noted, I attempt to bring the reality of what's happening now into services. So, as we light our chalice, I ask you to invite you to join me in a spirit of prayer and deep reflection as we continue to honor the reality of this date. I heard on NPR on the way down here the reports of the gatherings in New York, in Pennsylvania, and at the Pentagon to recognize what some call Patriots' Day, to recognize what happened 21 years ago on this date. So I invite you into a spirit of reflection and prayer, for a prayer for 9/11. Dear God, Spirit and life and love called by many names, and sometimes echoing most deeply within times of deep silence, we pause this day to remember. To remember and to honor those whose everyday workday in an office tower filled with thousands became an unspeakable tragedy. To remember and to honor all those who lost their lives, especially perhaps those who rushed into danger, hoping to save others. As we remember how each of us became aware of what had transpired in that fear-filled day, let us time to sit with what has echoed out from that terrible terrorist event. That horrible act of violence was followed by war and a seemingly endless shadow of fear. A climate of fear, and all too often the violence it both feeds and ignites, have continued to shade our culture. Islamophobia and other religious bias, fear, mistrust, and hatred towards those who speak or look differently, especially those who speak a language other than English or with brown or black skin, has grown. And thus our love-filled opposition to such attitudes and actions must also persist and grow. And so on this day, as we remember, let us recommit to the continuing holy work of dismantling bias and estrangement, violence and fear, and continue to speak and to act with love and respect for all. In the name of what each of us gathered here deems holy, for this we pray. Amen, and blessed be. We invite you now to rise and body your spirit for our opening hymn, Peace Like a River. The recorded UU version Martha found begins softly and slowly, and be prepared, it will pick up a bit. It's number 100 for those who wish to follow.
Like a river, I've got peace. Like a river, I've got peace. Like a river in my soul. I've got peace. Like a river, I've got peace. Like a river, I've got peace. Like a river in my soul. I've got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain in my soul. I've got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain in my soul. I've got love like an ocean. I've got love like an ocean. I've got love like an ocean in my soul. I've got love like an ocean. I've got love like an ocean. I've got love like an ocean in my soul. I've got strength like a mountain. I've got strength like a mountain. I've got strength like a mountain in my soul. I've got strength like a mountain. I've got strength like a mountain. I've got strength like a mountain in my soul. I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river in my soul. I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river in my soul. In my soul. I've got peace like a river in my soul. In my soul. I've got peace like a river in my soul. In my soul.
Now, in previous weeks, we've had this notion that I would bring a story along, and if there were children here, then I'd share it. But guess what? There is a child in each of us. So I invite you to bring your inner child into the room, make them a little more present than they might often be. For one thing, I brought this story another Sunday, and I didn't get to share it, and it's a favorite. It's Ferdinand by Monroe Leaf. And when I was a child, a real child, not just the inner child, but when my child was fully out there all the time, we had a recording on a record. Remember those? Many of you in this room still remember records of this story with appropriate, like, Spanish fanfare that I'm not going to try to replicate, but you can imagine that kind of sounds in your own mind as I share the story of Ferdinand by Monroe Leaf. Once upon a time in Spain, there was a little bull, and his name was Ferdinand. I can show you the illustrations, but they're pen and ink and difficult to see from back there. You can come and take a peek later if you'd like to. Anyway, the little bull, and his name was Ferdinand. All the other little bulls he lived with would run and jump and butt their heads together. But not Ferdinand. He liked to sit just quietly and smell the flowers. He had a favorite spot out in the pasture under a cork tree. It was his favorite tree, and he would sit in its shade all day and smell the flowers. Sometimes his mother, who was a cow, would worry about him. She was afraid he would be lonesome all by himself. "Why don't you run and play with the other little bulls and skip and butt your head," she would say. But Ferdinand would shake his head. "I like it better here, when I can just sit quietly and smell the flowers." His mother saw that he was not lonesome, and because she was an understanding mother, even though she was a cow, she let him just sit there and be happy. As the years went by, Ferdinand grew and grew until he was very big and strong. All the other bulls who had grown up with him in the same pasture would fight each other all day. They would hurt each other and stick each other with their horns. What they wanted most of all was to be picked to fight in the bullfights in Madrid. But not Ferdinand. He still liked to just sit quietly under the cork tree and smell the flowers. One day, 5 men came in very funny hats to pick the biggest, fastest, roughest bull to fight in the bullfights in Madrid. All the other bulls ran around snorting and butting, leaping and jumping, so the men would think they were the very, very strong and fierce and pick them. Ferdinand knew they wouldn't pick him, and he didn't care, so he went out to his favorite cork tree to sit down. He didn't look where he was sitting, and instead of sitting on the nice cool grass in the shade, he sat on a bumblebee. Well, if you were a bumblebee and a bull sat on you, what would you do? You would sting him. And that's just what this bull did to Ferdinand. And in the illustration, his eyes get really big. Wow, did it hurt. Ferdinand jumped up with a snort. He ran around puffing and snorting, butting and pawing the ground as if he were crazy. The 5 men saw him, and they all shouted with joy, "Olé!" Here was the largest and fiercest bull of all, just the one for the bullfights in Madrid. So they took him away for the bullfight in a cart. What a day it was. Flags were flying, bands were playing, and all the lovely ladies had flowers in their hair. They had a parade into the bull ring. Dun, 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 dun. So I'll do a little flourish. Right? First came the bandoleros with long, sharp pins with ribbons on them to stick in the bull and make him mad. Next came the picadors, whom rode skinny horses, and they had long pair of spears to stick in the bull and make him madder. Then came the matador, the proudest of all. He thought he was very handsome and bowed to the ladies. He had a red cape and a sword and was supposed to stick the bull last of all. Then came the bull, and you know who it was, don't you? Yes, it was Ferdinand. They called him Ferdinand the Fierce, and the bandoleros were afraid of him, and the picadors were afraid of him, and the matador was scared stiff. Ferdinand ran to the middle of the ring, and everyone shouted and clapped because they thought he was going to fight fiercely and butt and snort and stick his horns around. But not Ferdinand. When he got to the middle of the ring, he saw the flowers and all the lovely ladies' hair, and he just sat down quietly and smelled. He wouldn't fight and be fierce no matter what they did. He just sat and smelled. And the bandoleros were mad, and the picadors were madder, and the matador was so mad he cries because he couldn't show up with his cape and sword. So they had to take Ferdinand home. And for all I know, he is sitting there still under his favorite cork tree, smelling the flowers just quietly. And he is very happy. The end.
That was one of my children's favorite book, and I still have it. That version of the 70s was in big red print, red cover with black print. Now's the time in our service where we remember our joys and concerns with silent or spoken candle lighting regarding those with significant milestones in our lives. Including those at home, please participate by lighting your own candle or have quiet reflection of things that are going on with you. I invite those who wish to light a candle, silent or spoken, to form a line over here to my right. And I will have candles in the front. And when it's your turn, please give your name and please be brief. Now's the time in our service when we take an offering. And we know that our financial contributions to this congregation comes from sacrifice and hard work. We are so grateful for this and commit together to ensure the funds that we gather collectively do a greater good for ourselves and our world than they could have done alone. May there be an offering to sustain and grow the life and mission of this congregation, and may we give in love and in hope. For the gifts which we have received, may we be truly grateful. May we be committed to using these gifts to make a difference in the world and to expand our beloved community.
A koan is an open invitation in a shell to go on an open exploration in yourself. How does a prism help to make the invisible clearer? And why inside a gift of Chinese boxes does the innermost contain just a mirror? A koan is an open invitation in a shell to go on an open exploration in yourself. Pregnant question of the teacher seemed to only lead in circles without end. But as I traced it round and round, upon reflection there I found it led me in circles within. A koan is an open invitation in a shed to go on an open exploration in yourself.
My book. Oh, there it is.
We had scheduled a meditation after this, and I crafted some words that I might share. But I'd rather suggest that we just reflect on those words that Sean just gifted us with as we breathe in and breathe out together. Noting that when I'm breathing in, I'm breathing in. When I'm breathing out, I'm breathing out together in silence. Let's take a cleansing breath in and out together as we return to a time of words. We're going to do a reading from the hymnal, and we have it listed as a responsive reading, but I want to do it something just a little different than the traditional responsive reading. It's something called reading antiphonally, which is a word I learned from a retired Episcopal minister who was a member of the congregation I served on Whidbey Island. And antiphonally basically means rather than it reading coming between the pulpit and the congregation, you read it to each other. And the way it's going to work is this side of the room, I invite you to take reading 551, Earth Teach Me, and this side of the room will read the regular print to this side of the room, who will then join with Martha and read the italicized print back to us. Okay? So, Earth Teach Me, 551. This reading is attributed to the Ute Indians of North America. Earth, teach me stillness as the grasses are stilled with light.
Earth, teach me suffering, and old stones suffer with memory.
Earth, teach me caring, as parents who secure their young.
Earth, teach me courage, as the tree which stands and all alone.
Earth, teach me limitation, as the ant which crawls on the ground.
Earth, teach me freedom, as the eagle which soars in the sky.
Earth, teach me resignation, as the leaves which die in the fall.
Earth, teach me regeneration, as the seed which rises in the spring.
Earth, teach me to forget myself, as melted snow forgets its life.
Earth, teach me to remember kindness, as dry fields weep with rain.
Thank you.
Get this out of your way. Man. Sorry. Just want to get this out of your way. Thank you.
We've got papers up here and iPads and our
Books.
assorted paraphernalia of life. The Buddhist teacher, Beamish Chodron, advises that when we pause, allow a gap, and breathe deeply, we can experience instant refreshment. Suddenly, we slow down, look out, and there's the world. This summer, I took some special time for an intentional pause in my all too busy schedule, time to slow down, to allow a gap to look out and to see the world. As a retiree, you might think I could just do that almost any time. But it seems that my retirement, as are many of yours, has been filled with tasks like nurturing my garden, serving on multiple community and church committees, and preaching here and in other congregations. It seems I need to get out of town to really pause, to where my calendar does not shape my days and I do not need to pull a single weed. Best of all is somewhere in nature, and it's even better if it's a place where there is no internet or cell phone coverage, which is getting harder to do all the time. Anyway, Suzanne and I did that last month as we went with my daughter Lindsay and her partner Frank and our 2-year-old grandson Jasper on a brief camping trip to Alderdoon Campground, a bit north of Florence over on the coast. It's close to town even, but not just far enough away from town to have lousy cell phone coverage. It's a sweet spot. I had not camped there before, but I will no doubt return. It's perfect as there's just a little bit of noise you can hear in the background from the nearby 101 highway. But the sound is the lightest in the first come, first serve campsites on the south end of the campground where we stayed. There is also a sweet little lake down that way. My deep pause time came early one morning before anyone else had yet woken up. I took myself for a short morning walk around the lake, which ended up at an old worn bench nestled in the trees, a bench that looked out on the lake. That morning, a soft breeze rustled the leaves just enough to provide white noise, so I wasn't even aware of the sounds coming from the highway. It was a quiet, clear, and bright morning, and as I looked out on the lake, I was gifted with a view across the lake of dense brush and sculpted pine trees, a sand shore and a soft blue sky, and even softer, wispy clouds that were still tinted by the soft pastels of the sunrise. It was lovely. And as a bonus, this sweet view was repeated as a reflection on the still waters of the lake. I got to see it twice at the same time. The clarity of this mirror view varied as each soft gust of wind would ruffle the water's surface and carve reflected image into wave-shaped patterns. When the gusts were their strongest, the waves would erase the picture altogether and replace it with a pattern of glistening lines, as each ripple reflected its own bright flash of the morning sun. Seeing the full view was at times like looking at oneself in a shattered mirror. In the still times, the reflection closely matched what I saw directly on the shore and the slope behind it, though even when things were still and their clearest, the reflection gave greater emphasis to some parts of what I saw directly. The reflected gray tree trunks, the dead dry branches, and the yellow dying leaves on some of the shrubs stood out and were more clearly visible in the reflection than were the multitone greenery by which they were surrounded. It seems the reflection of the greenery was sort of washed out in the water. The separate green tones blurred and blended, and at the edges of one tree or shrub merged with the similar hues around it. It all simply looked green. I sat for a time, immersed in the moment and just reveling at the beauty before me. There it was, the world. My thoughts, as they usually do, began to wander after a time. As I noticed the changes with the wind, I also found myself pondering about the very nature of reflections and about how reflection is never quite the same as the original reality or experience that it reflects, and how disturbances and changes, even slight ones, can alter the reflected image. I let those thoughts drift in and out, and each new thought that blew through my mind created its own ripples. Then, for a time, I let them go, to return to simply marveling how lovely it all was at that moment, how spectacularly gorgeous it simply is. Breathing out, breathing in, I was still waters. Breathing out, I was calm. A soft smile crept across my face, and I felt tensions fade from my body. It was sweet, sweet in a way that almost defies description. In time, though, my more structured patterns of thought began to take precedence, and I began to plan how the rest of the day would be, and if and how I might share with others what I had seen and experienced in those delicious reflective moments. I continued to think about the whole concept of reflections and how reflecting on both the things we see literally in our eyes and in constructed contemplative reflections can shape our view of the world and perhaps shape the unfolding of our lives. And then bits of an old Supreme song from the late 60s snuck into my thoughts as I walked the path back to our campsite. Reflections on the way things used to be. Through the mirror of my mind, time after time, I see reflections of you and me. Reflections of how life used to be. At the time, I couldn't remember all the words, but that notion of how through the mirror of my mind, I see reflections of how life used to be resonated within. When I got back from the camping trip, I Googled the rest of the lyrics. And I found that the last portion of what the songwriters had written, even though written as a love song, seemed to serve as a description of what happened on 9/11/2001. Right before my eyes, my world turned to dust. Such an image. On 9/11, the world we thought we knew turned to dust. So much crumbled right before our eyes, not just buildings, but most significantly our unique American sense of security and national invulnerability. Fear of becoming victims of terrorism skyrocketed. I remember a comment from back then when somebody asked, what would it feel like to live in a place where terror and violence are always possibilities, something we need to be concerned about? And the answer I heard was, it would be like living in Tel Aviv or many other cities across the world, or perhaps what it would be like to live in Ukraine right now, where violence and terror is always present. That day in 2001 led to 2 wars, one in Iraq under questionable circumstances, and another in Afghanistan that lasted for 20 years and definitely did not end well. The climate of fear that spread like ripples from that day has unfortunately not ended. Security screenings continue at airports and big events ranging from international gatherings like the World Athletic Championships in Eugene to the locally focused Blaine County Fair. Who knew I would need a clear bag and go through security to go to the county fair? Fear has become endemic, for fear, like a cancer, grows. That terrible event seems to have increased many white people's fear of anyone who looks or speaks differently than we do. Fear of all non-white immigrants and of resident racial minorities seems to have grown, or at least become more visible. As noted, though, the problem with reflections is we often see most clearly the difficult, harshest aspects of what was there. And in our recollections of history, we often forget the lushness and the sweetness of everyday living. We forget things like birthdays. I have a colleague who describes September 11th, 2001 of one of the most amazing days of her life because her second child was born that day. All those things were going on. Yet all too often what memories we choose to reflect on are those harsh ones. But what we choose to reflect on can be a matter of choice. The sense of shared purpose that Americans shared in the weeks that followed 9/11 are an example of how good arises in response to a tragedy. The number of folks who offered help to New Yorkers was awesome. We saw the same thing in response post-Katrina, and closer to home, the response of support to victims of the Holiday Fire and other fires in Oregon. And I just read the Eugene Register Guard this morning, the accounts of the assistance offered to the 3,000 people who fled Oak Ridge just yesterday. In the midst of difficult times, I find I sometimes need to look closely to see the positive growth and renewal that is always taking place. These days, when people ask, "How are you doing, Dennis?" my typical response is, "I'm doing great, particularly considering the world is on fire." Now, it's meant primarily as a comment about climate change, but these days it feels very, very close to home because it is. This past week, it was particularly true. My family had planned for a special last couple of days hanging out with my daughter Lindsay and their family before they returned to South Africa, which we put them on a plane just yesterday morning. Their home is in South Africa. We will not see them for a time. We made some plans, and we rented a cabin on Cultus Lake, just off the Cascade Highway. Well, it didn't work out as planned. The night before we were scheduled, we learned via an internet news report that because of the growth of the Cedar Creek fire near Waldo Lake, that small resort where we had a reservation had received an evacuation order. In the days that followed, I read about how all the buildings there were wrapped in large pieces of foil in an effort to protect them. Now, rather than simply cancel, we looked at other options. We were seeking a lake where we'd all be together and canoe and hang out. And because Lindsay's mother, Helen, was joining us, no longer camps, we sought a little lakeside rustic resort. Odell Lake was a thought, but then we realized if the wind shifted, we would be in smoke there. We finally decided to look further north and were able to book a cabin at Lost Lake in the Mount Hood National Forest. By the way, I noticed when I got here this morning, I believe the photo on the front of the order of service is Lost Lake. Synchronicity, I guess. Lost Lake was a good choice. We had an amazing mini vacation, beauty all around, good shared meals, paddling on a gorgeous lake with a massive peak of the mountain whose true name is Wyeast as a backdrop. Best of all, grandson Jasper was just as sweet and charming as any 2-year-old can be. Very little of that difficult side of 2-year-olds. My life is amazing. Even though we were inundated with smoke when we returned to Eugene Friday night, my mind and heart will long be filled with wonderful memories of the time Suzanne and I spent with that little boy and his parents, and even my ex. Such times are not always the memories that first arise, but if we look closely at a complete reflection, we can see both the beauty of the green lushness and the harsh colors of decay. Mirrored images like reflection on a lake are clearest when we can find moments of calm. When I'm busy, my mind is more likely filled with responding to the present or planning to the short-term and longer-term future than it is immersed in reflective exploration of the past. And yet we all recognize that the old idiom, the past is mere prologue, is very true. History is often the gray and dark and the misty and the mist. Difficult parts of what was are usually the easiest to see. Reflections of lost love or errors and omissions, of mistakes, of hurts inflicted and hurts received, and images of difficulty and death are often the past images that reflect most clearly in our memory, unless we take time to mark more closely and more fully. Now, I want to clarify what I mean by reflecting on the past. I do not mean to dwell in the past, but rather to recognize its reality and to look at not just the negative parts that are often the easiest to see, but to look without attachment at the total reality, good and bad, from our pasts. This is true for 9/11, and it's true in our personal lives. Most of us remember more clearly the following towers than other positive interactions with children or grandchildren or other loved ones that may have occurred that day. As someone who back then worked in childcare, there were no doubt, scores of sweet interactions between children, and I do not remember them very well. We do need to look at both the difficult recollections and reflections, and sometimes overlook joys and acts of compassion, care, and courage, those that we can see when we look most deeply. Reflection breeds deeper understanding. Soren Kierkegaard observed that life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. Looking back, reflecting deeply on all that has occurred, the pain and the tears and the joys and the peace, help us to fully remember. To remember that we are at our core loving and caring, and even though we sometimes forget that core truth, when we come together in church, we remember. We remember that we sometimes encounter challenges, even in a beloved community, and we remember that love that dwells here in this community and dwells within. When we take time to reflect and listen deeply to the love all around us, we remember that I've got strength like a mountain. I've got strength like a mountain. I've got strength like a mountain in my soul, in my soul. May it be so. We invite you now to rise in body or in spirit for our closing hymn. It's 391 in the hymnal. Voice still and small.
I need to make an announcement about it.
Martha hasn't come.
The hymn that you're about to sing is a very quiet one. And may I respectfully suggest that we just stay seated and sing from our seats, because it's only 2 verses long, but it's very sweet and quiet.
Then rise in spirit, but not in body.
Ooh, ooh, voice still and small, deep inside all, I hear you call, singing. In dark and rain, sorrow and pain, still you remain, singing. Calming my fears, quenching my tears, through all the years, singing. Voice still and small, deep inside all, I hear you call, singing. In dark and rain, sorrow and pain, still you remain, singing. Calming my fears, quenching my tears, through all the years, singing.
We offer our closing words of benediction from the author Richard Jeffries. It is eternity now. I'm in the midst of it.
It is about me, in the sunshine. I am in it, as the butterfly in the light-laden air.
Nothing has to come. It is now.
Now is eternity. Now is immortal life.
Salam,
Shalom.
amen, and blessed be. Now let's rise in body and spirit for the closing song.